Good morning, everybody. Today's evidence will be broadcast over the live link, but only by voice and with voice modulation, and after a 15-minute gap. Those with mobile telephones in the part of the hearing room which is behind the screens may use them to report what they hear in the hearing room, but only after a 15-minute delay has occurred since the event that they're reporting. They may not be used for recording. Yes.
So we're going to swear the witness now.
Good morning. Good morning. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me okay?
I think HN53, you can hear us, but we can't hear you. HN53, please could you unmute on your Zoom? Thank you. We can hear you now, loud and clear. Thanks.
Thank you. Could you please hold the Bible in your right hand and repeat after me? I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
You have been granted anonymity, so I will refer to you by the nominal you've been given, HN53. HN53, you already provided a witness statement to the inquiry in relation to your undercover deployment, but in terms of your management in the SDS, you also provided 3 statements.
Yes, I did, yes.
Those are dated the 31st of July 2024, the 28th of October 2024, and the 13th of February this year.
Yes.
Are the contents of each of those 3 statements correct?
Yes.
You were an SDS undercover police officer in the 1980s.
Yes, I was.
And after your deployment had come to an end, you were later approached by Bob Lambert. Is that right?
Yes, I was, yes.
Could you help us with the circumstances in which he approached you for the first time in relation to becoming a manager in the SDS?
I don't recall how he contacted me in the first place, whether by phone or a chance meeting, but we met at in either Green Park or St James's Park. I think it was St James's Park, I beg your pardon. And basically, Bob explained that he was moving on from his role as the DI on the unit, and that I was being considered for the post, and was I interested?
At that stage, how would you describe your relationship with Bob Lambert? Was he a friend, a colleague? What would your description be at that point when he approached you?
At that point, I would put that both as a friend and a colleague.
In your statement, you refer to your experience as a UCO, and the way in which you describe it is that was just one part of your selection as a manager. And what you've just described, it sounds like a relatively informal approach by Bob Lambert. Was there anything more to the selection exercise?
I don't recall that there was certainly no formal interview or other process to go through. I don't think that there was any other, as I said, no other formal process for it.
Looking back on it now, does it seem to you that it was overly informal a process? In other words, Bob Lambert, who you described as a friend, contacting you, asking you whether you want to be put forward to the post of DI in the SDS. You indicated yes, you would be interested, and then you end up replacing him. Looking back on that now, do you think it was overly informal?
It is informal, and it reflected perhaps the way that recruitment was carried out for that particular post. And this is really, I think, a consequence of the family nature of Special Branch, that most people knew everyone else, and reputations were tried and tested and known about within the branch. And I perhaps got the sense that when Bob approached me for this, he was doing it on behalf of the management within the SDS, and I would include the senior management of that. So in that sense, it was edging between the informal and the formal. It was Bob's relationship with me, having worked with him before, was simply the mechanism for that approach.
So no point in having a series of formal interviews with you because you were a known quantity, is that?
I think that's what I'm trying to say, yes.
To what extent does that also apply to UCO recruitment? How would you distinguish? You described an informal approach to your posting as a DI, but how did that compare to the recruitment of UCOs?
Well, I think there is a certain amount of that in the selection of UCOs. I think the difference is that at the DI level and perhaps the Office DS level, you're talking about individuals who have been much longer within the branch and whose experience, knowledge, and way of working is better known about. Whereas the UCOs would be recruited from a pool of newer officers to Special Branch, all of whom would have experience of some sort and reputation, but it would be part of the process as far as UCOs were concerned, and then there would be a more defined process to select them.
You occupied the rank of DI in the SDS from October 1998 to September 2005, so a period of nearly just under 7 years,
yes,
taking over from Bob Lambert. When you first started and took over from him, to what extent, if any, was there a handover by Bob Lambert to you? So you began in post 19th of October 1998. You're now DI in the SDS, taking over from Bob Lambert. But how did he help prepare you for that role? Did he, for example, talk about the individual officers that you would be overseeing? Could you describe for us any handover process?
The only, if you like, handover that took place was a visit to one of the flats to meet the team. I'm assuming from memory before I actually joined. And during the course of that, at the meeting, Bob and other management officers would have run through the individual operations of individuals who would themselves have also explained it. But in the sense of any handover from Bob Lambert, apart from the initial recruitment meeting and any dialogue that took place at the meeting, that was it as far as a handover is concerned.
And so at this meeting, were the UCOs there?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was one of the bi-weekly meetings that I went along to and was introduced, and they introduced themselves to me.
And just so we get an idea, one of the twice weekly meetings is the one that you attended as your introductory meeting. Are we talking about a 45-minute, 1 hour meeting? Was it much longer than that from memory?
I'm guessing the meeting would have lasted about an hour, 3/4 an hour, but I don't remember whether we then went into clubs or clusters or whatever. But it would have been, bear in mind, I wouldn't have had transport to the meeting other than courtesy of the office, I would have been there for the duration of the meeting.
Now, as I indicated, you had been a DI in the SDS for some 7 years, and so during that time, a number of UCOs came through the SDS.
Yeah.
But I just want to go through, and of course we will descend into the detail of their deployments in due course, but particularly looking at that early meeting, was HN26, so cover name Christine Green, was she one of those that was there at that initial meeting?
Well, she was certainly serving at that time. I'm assuming that everyone was at that meeting, but I don't remember if it was a full house or not, but she was certainly there at that time.
And in terms of the description of these officers' deployments, was it general areas where they were deployed, or was there any aspect of this early meeting where problems were expressed? So, for example, this officer's had this difficulty, this has arisen in this deployment, anything of that nature, or was it all quite positive? This officer is involved in this area, doing good work here, doing good work there, just a sort of general. What's your recollection of the nature of your interaction with UCOs?
I don't remember any particular issues, major or otherwise, being discussed there. And my memory is that it was all really a positive presentation, a broad brush presentation from each of them. Presentation is probably too strong a word, but just an account of what they were doing.
And just in terms of this particular point in time, Mark Jenner, was he?
He would have been there
at that meeting. In relation to him, is your answer the same, that you don't recall any specifics? It was just a general introduction.
It was a general introduction to all of them, yes.
Again, Jim Boyling, he would have been there at the time. Any particular recollection of him back then in that first meeting?
No, not from that one.
HN81, so cover name David Hagan. Again,
yes.
Anything particular that you recall at that stage?
No.
James Thompson?
Yes, he was there.
Do you?
Oh, sorry, he would have been there, yes.
And the reason you're saying that, is it because the meeting was a long time ago? You don't have a particular recollection?
Simply because I don't remember whether it was 100% or not.
All right. HN60, who had cover name Dave Evans, do you recall him at all at that time, during that meeting?
I do, yes.
Okay. HN3, cover name Jason Bishop. Again, do you recall?
I think he had started by then. Yes.
Now, in terms of other officers that were in the SDS after this meeting began, is it correct that the other deployments that took place during your tenure included Carlo Siraki?
Yes.
HN77, cover name Jackie Anderson.
Yes.
HN118, Simon Wellings.
Yes.
Towards the end of your time in the SDS, Robert Hastings.
Yes.
Again, towards the end, HN66.
Yes.
And I don't want you to give any dates, but another officer, HN91, which I think should be on your list.
Yes.
All right. I wonder if we could please turn up a document in the bundle. So it's at your tab B63. It's MPS 0527313. HN53, do you have a screen to hand? Can you see the document? It should say cover sheet on the page there. Is that right?
Yes, I've got that, yes.
I wonder if we can turn to page 3 in that document, please. Now, this is part of a branch note which related to a visit to the SDS by HMIC in January 1999, and so this would have been prepared for that visit. But we can see there's a helpful chart setting out the structure of the SDS at that level. And so is it correct that at this stage, your DCI was HN 58.
Yes, he was.
He was your DCI, wasn't he, up to about the middle of 2001, and then DCI Michael Dell took over from him in that position.
Yes, that's right. Yes.
Now, we can see there the DSs below you. So we've got DS Noel War, Stephen Tiddy, and Bernard Greeny. So those are the three DSs that were under your command when you first joined as DI in 1998, yes?
Yes, yes.
And then as time went on, other DSs replaced them, and so the other DSs included HN9, HN30, also Ron Gilbertson, and again, towards the end, Stephen Beals.
Yes.
Now, it's not on that chart, but if we went up the ranks in terms of the commanders, head of special branch, was it when you joined Barry Moss was commander?
Barry Moss would have been commander, yes.
And then he was replaced by Roger Pierce from 1999 to 2003.
Yes.
And then from 2003, the last year, 2 years of your role as DI, Janet Williams took over from him. Does that accord with your recollection?
I think there was Colin Black in the middle somewhere as commander. But I can't remember which order.
If we turn to page 11 in the document that we have here, I wonder if we can just go up towards the top of the page. So again, this is still part of the same document, and we can see here there's a summary on a page of your role as detective inspector in the SDS. So we can see, as we've seen from the previous chart, that you reported to the DCI, who at the time was HN 58.
Yes.
And we can see your responsibilities, so line management of SDS field and office staff, assisting in the formulation of targeting strategy for SDS operations. On an operational level, implementing the agreed SDS targeting strategy by overseeing the intelligence management carried out by the three office DSs. And so these bullet points, are they accurate?
Yes, I think so.
And so just to conclude what's set out here, deputising for HN 58 in all areas of his responsibility, so helping him maintain the security of the SDS operation, liaison with other police departments, recruitment, welfare, but also financial supervision of SDS funds. So in terms of a job description, if you like, would you agree that that is an accurate description of it?
I think that's certainly in the early stages of my deployment there, that would be an accurate reflection. It changed to some extent, or it really developed so that more of the lower bullet points became a primary responsibility, but the other, the first three bullet points did still remain there. So it was more emphasis, much more emphasis on the final bullet point, the fourth bullet point, for a range of because of a range of circumstances.
So are you saying that although your role was DI, that as your time progressed in that role, you took on more and more of the DCI responsibilities? Would that be fair? Is that what you're saying about the change of emphasis?
Not really the DCI responsibilities. I think the first page that you put up had operational manager as the DI's role. I think that was how I started under excuse me, HN 58. That changed fairly quickly to dealing with the five elements of the fourth bullet point, which from almost the time that I started began to be consumed much more of our time and needed much more of a focus, if you like.
Or just to be clear, where did your focus go to as a specific bullet point or a specific area? Could you just be clear about that?
I'm really talking about the elements of welfare provision for the unit, financial management of the unit, and then the I'm sorry, I just need to ask you. And Operation Muscat and the fallout from the TV documentary. Okay. But those elements became, which were overall the responsibility of the DCI, but some of that had been the responsibility of, for instance, the DSs and or the DI. They consumed more time.
Because you'd been a UCO in the SDS in the 1980s, and so you come back in from 1998 into the SDS, could you just help us with of course you're now a manager, not an undercover officer, but could you help us with the impression that you received as to what had changed, or whether anything really had changed in that intervening period? So from the 1980s when you were deployed to when you were a manager, what were the sort of changes that you noted either in culture, procedure, anything that impacted on you when you first rejoined the SDS?
If I went back to that first meeting just before I joined to meet the team, I came away with the impression almost that the only thing that had changed in many respects was the personalities of individuals. But when I joined, I felt it was a much more, I'm not sure whether, a much more professional and polished outfit, which was a result. That's not to criticise what had happened before in terms of how the unit was run, but I think it seemed to me a product of positive development of ways of carrying out the work, and what hadn't changed for me was the high ability of the officers deployed.
Now, you said the personalities had changed. Obviously, they're different UCOs to your counterparts and colleagues when you were in the SDS in the 1980s, but was the nature of their personalities different? Were they more outgoing? Was there any real sort of change in their manner? You've referred to professionalism, but there's any change?
No, I think it's rather like anything in life, that there was a group of individuals, and there would be quiet individuals, there would be extrovert, introvert, some outgoing, some not outgoing, but all marked by a high degree of ability and, for me, integrity and ability to go out and do the job on their own.
In what way was it more, or did it strike you as being more professional and more polished? Could you just give us an example of that, or why, of course, sort of as time goes by with the technology and the introduction of more of computers, but what was it that struck you as much more professional and polished?
Well, I think I suppose you would say that the quality of information seemed to be of a higher standard. I mean, that it's all relative, and I think the management of the product of that information struck me, although I wasn't involved in the intelligence management when I was a UCO, but it struck me that things had improved, so that the information that flowed through from the individual officers had a higher degree of integrity and value, I think.
Was your initial view that these officers had a high degree of integrity? Would you agree that that was shown to be misplaced, to that impression that, well, here are officers with a high degree of ability and integrity, that impression was incorrect with the benefit of hindsight? Would you accept that?
With the benefit of hindsight, there are instances where that was not true.
Again, we will go into individual deployments, but is that not understating the position to say that, well, there were instances where officers did not act with integrity? Was it not widespread amongst the UCOs, this lack of integrity?
Well, I certainly didn't think so at the time.
But knowing what you know now, would you accept that this is not just a few instances, but it was widespread, the questionable integrity of the UCOs that were ultimately under your command?
I wouldn't say widespread, because I believe that the majority of officers who went through did have high standards of integrity.
Just referring to a few examples at this stage, and the officers, the list that we went through earlier, HN26, Christine Green, had an inappropriate relationship during her undercover deployment and ended up leaving not just the SDS, but the police.
So I believe, yes.
HN15, inappropriate relationships. Mark Jenner.
Yes.
Jim Boyling, inappropriate relationships.
Yes.
James Thompson, amongst other things, inappropriate relationships.
Yes.
Suggestion now that HN60, Dave Evans, also had an inappropriate relationship.
Yes.
Carlo Saraki, inappropriate relationships.
Yes.
HN91, inappropriate relationship.
Yes.
So just a quick canter through those officers. Again, in terms of the suggestion that there were instances of lack of integrity, if someone were to say it was widespread, this is not a case of a couple of or a few bad apples, it was widespread in the UCOs, would you not accept that?
Well, I have numerically, yes, that's the way it looks, yes.
One of the things that you mention in your statement is that that had changed when you rejoined as a DI, was that the DSs were directly responsible for various groups of the UCOs. Do you recall saying that in your statement? I can refer, you say frequent direct contact between the UCO and their DS handler or cover officer. This was an improvement over my time as a UCO because each DS was directly responsible for a small number of UCOs, which allowed them to get to know them better as individuals, thereby making it more likely that changes in behaviour or attitude would be noticed and addressed. So is that one of the differences that you recall?
Yes, it is. That would be quite a change from before.
Was there a problem with that in relation to overseeing the UCOs, that because the DSs, as you've described it, they were there as cover officers or handlers, that you relied on them a lot more than perhaps you otherwise would do in relation to the way in which these officers were conducting their deployments? Did you defer to the DSs? So, for example, not too concerned about the way in which these deployments are running, whether they're being run professionally, because I can rely on, for example, DS Bernie Greeny, and I know that he's overseeing officers, and so if there was anything, he has his ear to the ground. Was that part of the problem, that there was over-reliance on the DSs to monitor the UCOs?
No, I think that's simply delegation of responsibility and division. The division of effort on that meant that fewer officers had a single point of contact, rather than all of the team having the point of contact with just the DI. And I'm not sure whether that direct oversight had changed significantly from my time to the time that I joined. It was more refined, I think, when I joined.
Going back to the document that we have up on screen, can you see 3 bullet points from the bottom of the page? There's reference to one of your responsibilities for recruitment.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to ask, can we take this document down? Because I want to ask you about another document, which is, sir, your tab B81. It is MPS 0733191, please. So what we're going to bring up on screen, this is, we can see a file note, it's headed recruitment. We've dated this document the 28th of May 1999. It relates to interviews that were conducted with potential recruits. And I wonder if we could please turn to page 6 in this document. So we can see there, this is one of the interview days, SDS selection interviews, Friday the 28th of May 1999, and we can see there 9:30 in the morning, Carlo Siraki, and then 11:30 later in the morning, HN77. At this point they were candidates, and below that we can see your DCI 58, yourself HN53, but also one of the DSs, Noel War, were on the interview panel.
Yes, that's right.
And we'll go through. Does this look familiar to you, this document?
It does, yes.
And do you recall at this stage of recruitment that the candidates were presented with a number of scenarios, and part of your role was to see how the candidate responded to various scenarios?
It was, yes.
The scenarios that were, and there are a number of them, were they scenarios that presented things that could happen during their deployment? For example, an officer being asked to drink drive or to take drugs. Practically, things that could arise and probably would arise at some point during their deployment.
Yes, there were hypothetical situations that were designed to test what the applicant's reaction would be.
Did you have any input into the questions? Did the DS draft them? Can you remember who was responsible for creating these types of documents?
I probably contributed to it, and I suspect that it would have been done on as a joint exercise by the office, so that there was a wider range of possibilities, situations. So I suspect it was a joint effort.
We're on page 6 at the moment. I'm going to ask if we could please skip forward. We'll have a quick look at the next page, so we just have an idea of the scenarios there. We can see this is a scenario that is presented by your DCI HN58. But in fact, I'm going to fast forward through these. I wonder if you can just go to the next page, as it's setting out various instances of what might happen. But if you look at number 4, so here, both before and during the journey, you become increasingly aware that Baz's interest is rather more romantic than strictly political. And as you pull up outside her house, she invites you in to spend the night. How would you react? Now, it's quite a striking example. Do you remember if you had any input into this particular question? Appreciate it's a long time ago, HN53, but does that ring any bells?
I would say probably yes. I would have contributed to that.
What was the reason that you asked the candidates, and on this particular day, asking Carlo Siraki, who we know went on to have inappropriate relationships, but also HN77 questioned in a similar manner on this day? Why did you or HN58 ask them this question about how they would react to someone, an activist, inviting the UCO in to spend the night? What was the purpose of asking that question?
Well, rather like some of the other questions, we wanted to establish how well the individual would be able to extricate themselves from that situation as cleanly as possible.
Would you agree with this, that this question shows that sexual encounters with activists was a real practical issue for UCO deployments?
I think I would respond to that to say that it was considered at the time a possibility, along with other possibilities, in the context of drugs or other issues like that.
Now, we don't have, on this document, we've just got the typed document from the SDS hard drive. We don't have, you can see it says comments, so we don't have handwritten notes underneath it. But do you have any recollection of either Carlo Siraki or indeed HN77, how they approached this particular section of the scenario test?
I'm sorry, I don't specifically, but my assessment now would be that based on the fact that they were accepted into the unit, I would suggest that the answers from both of them, including Carlo Siraki, were that they provided a realistic and objective answer to that, in the sense of extricating themselves and not progressing the romantic side anymore.
If I can put it this way, was there a right answer? Was there a wrong answer to this question?
Well, there is a wrong answer, and that would be to continue the physical side, the romantic side. That would be the wrong answer.
So if a candidate said, I would have had sex with the activist in order to maintain cover. If they were to say that in interview at this stage, what would be the consequence of that?
Well, the process wouldn't have continued. As far I'm speaking for myself, the interview would not have continued, and the application wouldn't have continued.
Why not?
Because it's not appropriate.
But why is it not appropriate in your mind?
Well, it's not. It would not be professional. It would be compromising the individual's security. It would not be consistent with the trust that is placed in the officer as a UCO.
Did you ever explicitly say that to the UCOs that were under your command?
I'm fairly sure I did. I understand that I did to one of the officers, and I'm certainly aware that I recall a meeting that Mike Dell had with the team where he specifically said that any relationship within the unit within the unit or outside would result in the individual leaving the unit immediately.
Now, we will come back to that particular meeting where Mike Dell said what you have said that he said, and we will go into that in some detail. But at this point, do you remember when Mike Dell said that to the UCOs when you were present? Do you have?
I'm sorry, I don't know when that was. But...
Don't worry, we will return to it, and I wonder I might be able to assist you by looking at other documents around that time. But just going back to what you've just said, is that there was this meeting where Mike Dell was clear about the position, but you say that you recall that you mentioned this to another officer as well. Was that outside of that meeting where DCI Dell was very clear at the position?
This was a separate. This is a document that I've seen, and I'm sorry, I can't remember which officer it was from. But the comment from the officer was that I had raised that. I had made that explicit. Right. But I don't recall specific occasions when I've made that point.
Okay. Knowing what you know now, would you agree that the fact that UCOs should not have any form of sexual relationship with those that they are spying on should have been made clear, not just them being told, but in documentation when they joined?
With the benefit of hindsight, yes.
Could we take that document down and go to MPS 0733163? So this is your tab B155. HN53, this is another set of selection interviews. We're moving forward in time. We were looking at 1999, so we're now 2001. We can see there that one of the applicants on the 30th of January 2001 was HN118, and we can just see in the terms of the panel there was HN58U, HN53, and also Steve Tiddy.
Yes.
And so it's a slightly different format, but again, does this look familiar to you in terms of the layout of the interview script? And again, we don't have the details, but the comments is space to put comments underneath.
Yes, it looks familiar.
Again, if we turn forward here to page 3, please. So we can see sex and drugs and rock and roll, and you can just make out, it says skills, moral and ethical boundaries, creativity, use of legend, awareness, moral dilemmas, levels of commitment, different values in society. Now we can see the numbers 1 to 5 next to that. Do you remember sort of ticking those as you went through these questions in terms of the way in which they were answered?
I do, but I don't recall whether 5 was the highest or the optimum, or 1 was the optimum. But yes, that would make sense.
We can see that you were at a social event with your wearies, had a couple of drinks. One of the leading lights in the organisation asks you to drive them home. What do you do? So this is a test in relation to drink driving. And is it correct that if the answer that was given was, well, even though I've had too much to drink, I don't want to break cover, I would still drive, would that be, if I can describe it, as a deal breaker? Or what was the attitude of the SDS or the interview panel to that question?
Well, if the answer was that I would get straight in the car and drive when I was drunk, then that would certainly be a marker, a negative marker in terms of how we would assess the candidate, and then consideration of the answers on the ensuing question.
Well, let's go to those ensuing questions. So we can see the next one. As you are over the limit, the same weary offers to share a cab home with you. When you get to your place, they do a bunk from the cab. What do you do? So this is testing this committing a criminal offence. And again, in relation to the answer to this, would there be a wrong answer? So, for example, if the undercover officer said, I wouldn't want to break cover, so I would just run away from the cab as well, would that be, depending on the way in which they answered it, it wouldn't be necessarily a deal breaker as a question?
There would be, it would depend on how the individual answered the question.
Next part of the scenario, when the cab has finally gone, the weary invites herself in for coffee and then offers you a joint so that you can both relax. What do you do? And again, in terms of if, for example, the candidates indicated, well, if it was cannabis, I would have joined in order not to break cover, but nothing in relation to hard drugs. That's the sort of answers that you would be looking for. Is that right?
Yes, it would. The whole thing is meant to be an exercise in the judgment of the individuals in terms of trying to extricate themselves from situations that they shouldn't be in.
The scenario continues over the page, please. So the top question, when you have both had coffee, it becomes obvious that she has no intention of leaving before the morning. What do you do? So this is another question about what the UCO would do when faced with the possibility of having sex with an activist. Is that right?
Yes, and all of those questions are a refinement of the previous question that you asked me about just now.
So a repeat question in the interviews is the officer's reaction to the possibility of having sex. It's a common question.
Yes.
Can you recall whether it featured, as far as you're aware, in all the interviews that you conducted, the question about the sexual relationship, or the question about us having sex with an activist, whether that scenario appeared in every one of the interviews as a question?
I'm not aware that this format changed, so I would guess that the broad question would have been asked of all of the candidates from this, or the time of the previous document you showed.
Now, these, for example, this document, we have HN118. He's one of the individuals who is being interviewed on this day. He was a cover name Simon Welling, so he's being interviewed on this day. But there's another officer or another candidate that is being interviewed who's not successful, and their name is redacted out. Can you recall whether officers or candidates gave answers to the effect that they would have sex with an activist, and that was the reason why their recruitment went no further? Does that ring any bells? For example, a discussion afterwards, well, this candidate indicated they would be happy to have sex with an activist. That candidate goes to the bottom of the pile, that they have to be rejected. Does that ring any bells? Any discussion about such an answer from unsuccessful candidates?
I don't recall that as being a specific reason for rejecting a candidate in my time.
I'd like to ask you about another document. I wonder if you can just take this down. It is MPS and it's 40919. So this is not in your bundle. HN53, what I'm going to show you is a batch of further selection documents. But I just want to ask you about a particular page. It's at page 10. So this, just to orientate you in time, so this would have been at a time that your DCI would have been HN58, and the reference there is introduction to the session, and then this: no right or wrong answers to various scenarios set. We are looking at a number of skills: self-discipline, self-motivation, the list goes on. Does that jog your memory? Is the sort of thing that your DCI would have said to candidates at the beginning, that, well, look, there are no right or wrong answers to these questions. We just want to see how you react and how you reason your reactions to it. That there was no right or wrong answers.
Well, much of that, I think, is reflected in the questions in that last document you showed me, without being explicit about no right or wrong answers. But that yes, I would recognise that.
So applying that to the questions about, for example, an activist invites you in to spend the night, your earlier evidence was that, well, that if an officer agreed to have sex with an activist, that would be the end of it. Would you not agree that this suggests that, well, actually it wouldn't necessarily be the end of it, because there are no right or wrong answers? So it may be that you have a candidate who says, well, yes, I would have engaged in sex with the activist and not be rejected because there are no right or wrong answers.
Well, I think that what this document lacks is the explicit, that if, for instance, the candidate was asked about drugs and he said, well, if I was in that situation, yes, I would take heroin or crack cocaine. And similarly, I would have, if the bold statement was, I would have sex with the individual to progress my operation, then that would be a wrong answer in as far as I'm concerned. But that was not made explicit in these documents, and that may be a reflection of what the climate was at the time. But I think it was, I would hope that my colleagues as well, I'm sure they would agree with that response, that those kind of specific responses to those situations would demand that the candidate wasn't accepted.
What do you mean by reflective of the climate at the time? What are you referring to there?
Well, I think there is probably more, well, there's certainly more awareness, consciousness of relationships now than there was at the time.
When you say there's more awareness of relationships, do you mean more awareness of UCOs?
No, I mean generally in the public.
Well, in all of these interviews, there are questions about relationships, aren't there? In the sense of, comes to the end of the night, activist suggests sex. That's covered clearly. Are you suggesting that the attitude towards sexual relationships was different at this time? That perhaps at that time, are you saying that it wasn't considered in the same way as it is today?
No, I'm not, because I think I certainly speak for myself, and I think I would speak for HN58 and Mike Dell and the management, that the physical relationships by UCOs would be unacceptable.
And just to press you on your reference to the climate at the time, was that about the extent to which such relationships were talked about?
No, I think it's more, when I said just now, the document that you showed me that talked about no right or wrong answers, the climate at the time would not have been to put brackets, taking heroin, or an answer that I would take heroin or I would sleep with an individual are off limits. I think the climate now would be to articulate that. But in 1998, 99, 2000, that would not have been the climate where that kind of specific would have been articulated on paper. And that's not because it was condoned. It's simply it was the climate at the time.
So is your evidence that at the time that we're concerned with, that there would not have been any form of discussion about relationships being off limits, that at the time that's not something that would have entered people's consciousness about that direct issue, whether it's off limits or not? It just wasn't thought through or wasn't addressed at the time. In what way was it off? The fact that it's off limits now differ from then, just to be clear.
Well,
in relation to that.
It was off limits then, but not. I use the example of not articulated, for instance, in that document.
Okay.
When I drew up the codes of conduct subsequently, that is an area that would have been made specific, I think.
Could we take that document down? I wonder if we could please now turn to MPS 0031195. So this is your tab B334. Now, we're moving in time, HN53, coming towards the end of your time as a DI. It is the induction training program for HN18, Robert Hastings. Now, I just want to ask you in relation to this, because this is moving on from the stage where candidates are interviewed. This is where they have been successful. So we can see here, this is setting out the early days for a new recruit in the SDS. Is that right?
Yes.
So we can see, well, week 1, join the SDS, and then it says introduction and initial briefing. So MD, so by this stage, your DCI is Mike Dell, but also you're there for the introduction and initial briefing. Could you help us with that? What was the nature of that initial briefing? So the candidate's been successful, it's their first day on the SDS, and you and your DCI provide them with an initial briefing. What was the nature of that, please?
Well, I think that would be the an introduction to how the unit worked effectively in terms of meetings and briefings, where meetings would take place. Clearly, the officer would meet the other UCOs at the field meeting, but there may have been an introduction just in very general terms to who he would be meeting. He would be told about the line of command to, for instance, which DS would be overseeing his work. That kind of thing.
Monday, the introduction. Tuesday, there's a strategy meeting. Again, you are HN53 referred to in the brackets after that. Could you help us with the nature of that meeting and how it differed from the initial briefing that you've just been describing, please?
Well, I'm taking it that would be a meeting with the officer, Rob Hastings, to discuss in more specific detail what the nature of his operation would be.
Below that, we can see commence study of the Tradecraft Manual.
Yes.
Now, given what we know about the Tradecraft Manual, would you agree that this was a significant mistake by you and your fellow managers, that on the second day of joining the SDS, the new UCO recruit is instructed to begin studying the Tradecraft Manual?
Well, it's the Tradecraft Manual I've never seen as anything more than a collection of helpful advice from previous officers. I didn't see it as a policy document. So in that sense, I suppose that the wording there is wrong, really.
Could we take that document down and could we turn to the Tradecraft Manual? It's your tab B10. It is MPS 0527597. So in terms of the second day on the SDS, being told to study this manual, but if we look at the front page of it, it does look quite official, doesn't it? So you've got a UCO new recruit being told, right, day 2, begin studying the Tradecraft Manual, and the first page they would have seen would have been this special demonstration squad that they just joined, and we can see that the manual there. It's not like a scrapbook. If we turn over the page, we can see it's, for example, indexed, and a lot of work has been put in to, for example, the table of contents. So again, would they not have been told to study this?
I'm sorry, could you repeat?
Would the UCOs on the second day that they joined the SDS be told to study the document that we have up on screen?
Yes. Well, there is, within the document, there are some very helpful tips and advice on how an individual might go around about the operation, but not all of it should have been written in the way it's written. So in that sense, it was perhaps wrong to direct the officer towards the document without editing the document properly.
Why wasn't the document edited properly, or why did it persist? Because the example that we're looking at is December 2003. So this document has been in the SDS for many years after RIPA comes into force. Why, after all those years, was it still being provided to the new recruits? How had it slipped through the net?
I don't really know the answer to that. It's a document that sat in the cupboard, and I think it was some of it was useful, and I think it was probably retained for that reason.
If we turn to page 5, please. At the top, towards the top of the page, thank you. So introduction, and then this 1.1, this manual of tradecraft for the Special Demonstration Squad is designed both for new members of the squad and also as a guide to best practice for members of the squad during their posting. Your description of this as being something that was stuck in the cupboard, is that not understating the position, given that firstly it's referred to on day 2 as a document that should be studied, but also on reading the document itself, it puts itself forward not as anecdotes but as a best practice guide. Do you think, looking back on that was a significant mistake to make?
Well, in the first instance, I always regarded this document as a subjective, this document and the contents of the so-called manual as a subjective and fairly informal guide for officers on a number of issues. What I think the phraseology on the introduction for the new officers guide should have said is that the tradecraft manual should be read with some qualification.
And in terms of qualification, if we turn to pages 27 to 28, please. So we're looking at paragraph 5.6.3. Under what we can, if we just keep it, what we have up on screen there, the sexual liaisons section. Is this something that you read? Obviously you've been referred to it a number of times by the inquiry in Rule 9 questions, but at the time, would you have read that section? So we're into the document quite some way. We're already on page 27, but the reference to sexual liaisons, is that something you would have read at the time in your position as DI?
I probably would have read the document at some point, but I don't recall the whole document in particular.
So just to go through, if we just go through this section, so 5.6.1, the thorny issue of romantic entanglements during a tour is the cause of much soul-searching and concern. In the past, emotional ties to the opposite, to the opposition have happened and caused all sorts of difficulties, including divorce, deception, and disciplinary charges. While it is not my place to moralise, one should try to avoid the opposite sex for as long as possible. Now, on reading that, do you have any recollection of being curious as to, well, what are the divorces and the disciplinary charges? What's that about? Do you remember being curious as to what these were referring to?
Well, as I said earlier, I don't have a great recollection of reading this document in detail, and it's something that I should have done when I was drawing up codes of conduct. But I I don't specifically recall any of this passage.
Would you agree that it is wrong advice to give a new recruit into the SDS?
Yes, it is.
Because it suggests, firstly, that there's almost an inevitability of relationships with activists, doesn't it?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you agree that it indicates that having a relationship with an activist is something that has happened before in the SDS?
I'm sorry, yes. Yes, it does, yes.
And instead of saying, if you engage in sexual relationships of any kind with activists, you will be disciplined. Instead of saying that, it says, not my place to moralise, try to avoid it for as long as possible.
Yes.
Again, reading that, does it not give, to some extent, a green light to such relationships if the advice is, well, try and avoid it for as long as possible?
Yes, I'd agree with that, yes.
Thank you. If we turn to the next paragraph, the free love attitudes of the 60s and 70s have largely disappeared in the minds of the extremists following herpes, hepatitis and AIDS. However, if you are doing your job properly, men and women in the field will experience occasional approaches from males and females, straight and gay. And so, again, in terms of the description of, well, look, if you're doing your job properly, you will be approached, indicating that there is some inevitability, if an officer is doing his job properly, that there would be such approaches.
Yes.
Yeah. Avoiding the straight-gay problem is relatively simple, but one should never use the excuse of homosexuality to avoid a heterosexual partner. Not only will your behaviour be wholly inconsistent, but you may well find the closeted and out homosexuals making a beeline for you. In a similar vein, don't use the excuse of being HIV positive as a reason for avoiding sexual contact. You simply cannot maintain the attitude of a person with HIV unless you know someone with the condition, and you may still face propositioning from wearies who are genuinely afflicted. So in terms of the advice that is given to undercover officers about how they should approach the topic of sexual relationships, instead of being clearly spelt out from the beginning, it is communicated to them, as we can see in paragraph 5.6.2, isn't it? It was never properly addressed by any of the managers at the start of any UCO deployment in the SDS, their approach to sexual relationships.
Well, this particular paragraph is a more helpful explanation of what the likely dangers are.
If we turn to the next paragraph, 5.6.3, while you may try to avoid any sexual encounter, there may come a time when your lack of interest may become suspicious. In these circumstances, you can either try to introduce an appropriate male or female from your own relations or friends to meet the wearies on a few occasions, or ask the office if they can find an ex-SDS operative to fill such a role. Just pausing there, what is your reaction to reading in this document provided to recruits from day two that there were circumstances in which, if in order to avoid a sexual encounter, they might want to introduce someone from their relations or friends? What's your reaction to reading that?
Well, that strikes me as something that is unstructured and too informal a process.
In his evidence to the inquiry, DS Bernie Greene described that advice as madness, in the sense of introducing a friend of yours to meet activists.
Yes.
And would you not agree that that would
Yes,
be
sir.
reckless advice?
Yes, I would.
Does that suggest that you hadn't read this particular paragraph if you agree that it is reckless advice? In other words, if you had have read it, would you not have done something about this particular section of the Tradecraft Manual at least?
Yes, I would.
And doing the best that you can, does that suggest it is more likely that you didn't read it?
Yes, it does.
Okay. It goes on, both options are fraught with difficulty and you must make your own mind up about how to proceed. If you have no other option but to become involved with a weary, you should try to have fleeting, disastrous relationships with individuals who are not important to your source of information. One cannot be involved with a weary in a relationship for any period of time without risking serious consequences. And what is your attitude now to reading that last section of this paragraph?
Well, it's completely wrong and completely inappropriate.
Completely wrong and inappropriate because it was firstly not prohibiting relationships with activists.
Yes.
It's because it doesn't prohibit it, and given its wording, it in fact encourages sexual liaisons.
Well, I was going to say it encourages it more than anything else. Yes.
It it's meant that no consideration was given at all when the officers were provided guidance with the activists who they had sex with. There was not any thought given to them. We can't see any reference to any consideration being given to them.
No.
In addition, it also would impact on the undercover officers' own family, essentially also encouraging a betrayal of their wives and partners.
Yes, it would.
We know, of course, that a significant number of the UCOs who engaged in sexual activity with activists were male, and
Yes.
that those that they slept with were female.
Yes.
Would you agree that what is being encouraged here, because of the disproportionate effect on women, is misogynistic, it is sexist?
Yes.
If someone were to say that this advice, because it is in a guidance document, a manual that is provided to undercover officers who are told to study it from the second day, if someone were to say that shows that there was institutional sexism, institutional misogyny in the SDS, because you only have to have a look at the guidance document that their new recruits were shown, what would your reaction be to that?
I'm not sure how I can answer that. In the way the question's been asked, that's probably the case.
In the opening to this inquiry in relation to this tranche, it was stated on behalf of the MPS that a significant number of UCOs engaged in serious sexual misconduct, and there was a continuing failure by the SDS's managers to prevent that misconduct from occurring. The MPS again apologises to the individuals affected and to the public for these failings and for the wider culture of misogyny and sexism that allowed them to happen. In relation to that apology, would you agree with that, or is there any aspect of it that you would disagree with?
No.
And just to add what was set out, that it was said on behalf of the Commissioner that sexual relationships and the poor management that facilitated them were unacceptable by the standards of any time and amounted to serious failings. Each such relationship would constitute discreditable conduct and should have been the subject of proper disciplinary processes. Would you agree with that description? In particular, the reference to the poor management that facilitated these relationships. Would you agree with that, or not?
I'm not sure that I do. I think everything was done to discourage physical relationships. I accept that the existence of that paragraph within the Tradecraft Manual was not helpful in the slightest, and in fact seems to encourage that behaviour. But at the end of the day, I think this is deception practiced by a number of officers that was concealed from the management. There is a limit to the intrusion that management can have over officers away from supervision when they're engaged on the operation. I think that the comments such as Mike Dell's in the meeting of officers demonstrated the position of the SDS management team, and I think in terms of awareness of these relationships, and coupled with the sense that the Tradecraft Manual seems to be encouraging that behaviour, is the absence of any effort by the individuals who engaged in those relationships to seek advice from the office on how they might extricate themselves from the situation they had got into. I think what I'm trying to say, the nature of the operation is one that relies on trust and integrity by the officers once they're engaged on the operation. And that trust and integrity has to operate both ways, so that when a situation like a physical relationship happens, then that should be a matter for discussion with the office to try and discover how they can extricate themselves from that situation. So I think the deception practiced by the officers to conceal that meant that there was little chance of the SDS management being aware of the situation at the time and being able to deal with it and address it.
Was there a problem with the culture in the SDS? And by that, I want to refer you to what you said earlier, because you said when you joined and you pointed out in particular there was a high degree of ability and integrity amongst the UCOs. And then we see that as each of their deployments progress, many of them engage in what you have described as deception. And so what has changed with these individuals? Is it because they, looking back on it, that these were officers that never had any integrity? Or what was the problem really, in fact, the culture of the SDS, that perhaps at the beginning these officers did have high degree of ability, a high degree of integrity, but from their first time in the SDS, that integrity evaporates because of the culture of the SDS? Isn't there a problem in the SDS itself?
Well, clearly there is a reason why the volume of these relationships happened, but what the reason is, I don't know.
Is part of the reason that, despite your evidence a few minutes ago that everything was done to prevent sexual relationships, in fact, from the start, all the indication is that they are acceptable, and they're never told, certainly at the beginning, they're never told not to do it. So isn't the blame, at least to some extent, with the management of these UCOs, many of whom were quite young when they joined as UCOs?
Well, I think when the officer joins the unit, it is clear to him that, for instance, the stable relationship, the fact that the individual's in a stable relationship is very important. All of the officers are intelligent, relatively experienced police officers who've been through a range of selection processes. They are all positively or direct vetted, and any change of circumstances has to be subject to reporting to the vetting, so that all of that says to the individual that the relationships outside of their own relationship would be inappropriate. And equally, if it was the case that they believed relationships were an acceptable part of the process, as that paragraph in the tradecraft manual suggests, then they would have quite freely spoken to SDS management to discuss how to manage that situation or to extricate themselves. That didn't happen.
One of the things that you set out in your statement is you said that new UCOs were trained and guided largely by those already deployed.
Yes.
So essentially learning from their peers.
Yes.
Is that not problematic in the SDS, given who each of these UCO's peers were?
Well, this is there is no alternative mechanism for training UCOs on a unit such as the SDS, because they can't. The individual can't go outside the unit for reasons of the covert nature of the unit. So the advice and guidance will inevitably come from peers.
Well, not great to have James Thompson instructing new recruits on tradecraft.
No, but that's with hindsight. Yes, I agree with them.
Or Carlo Siraki, Jim Boyling, Rob Hastings giving advice to new recruits about sexual relationships.
Again, had we known about those situations, that would not have been the case.
So I don't know whether now's a convenient time for a mid-morning break.
Certainly. We break for 15 minutes in the middle of each session to permit the transcribers to have a rest, and also yourself. We'll break for 15 minutes. Mr. Ramble.
HN 53, we covered this morning the fact that you had been an undercover officer in the 1980s and one of the longest serving DIs in the SDS, coming up to 7 years. You were a detective inspector. In relation to your working life and your experience, would you agree that compared to most lay people, that you would pay particular attention to detail, people's mannerisms, what they're saying, non-verbal communications, than perhaps the rest of us?
Yes, that's fair to say, I think.
And in terms of your rank, you took part in detective examinations. This was your working life as a detective.
Yes, it was.
And looking back on everything we know now about the UCOs that were under your command, again, can you help with how you missed all of those relationships, how you didn't pick up on it?
Well, frankly, I still don't understand how I and colleagues did not pick up on them, and I don't know what the reason is for that.
Just want to use as an example Mark Jenner. So he was recruited in September 1994, deployed February 1995. He was deployed up until April 2000. We know that he had a relationship with the person we're calling Alison from about spring to the summer of 1995 all the way until the spring of 2000, cohabiting with her from February 1996. So not a short relationship, but a long relationship. He was living with her. Again, how could you and your fellow managers have missed that?
Well, it was not the practice of the unit to visit officers at their covert addresses. So if the officer chose to cohabit with either an activist or non-activist, then and chose to conceal that fact from the office, it's very difficult to know how one would detect that was the case.
We will come on to your investigation into James Thompson in due course, but would you agree that you pretty quickly managed to work out that he was misconducting himself from your investigations?
In general, yes.
One example is phone billing. Look at the phone billing, and there are numerous calls to numerous women.
Yes.
And so, in terms of the suggestion that it is not possible to keep close tabs on undercover officers, isn't the reality that you as a manager and your fellow managers could quite easily have kept tabs on the UCOs?
I'm sorry, are you suggesting we should have done phone billing, or is it specific to...
You have spent your life spying as an undercover officer, managing undercover officers who spy on people. Is your evidence really that you could not have carried out some basic checks on undercover officers that were under your supervision, some of them for many, many years? Is your evidence really nothing could be done to keep tabs on them?
That would not have been an appropriate use of those resources.
Would it not have been the best use of those resources given the harm that has been caused?
I would tend to, I would say that had we resorted to that sort of intrusion into officers, UCOs, operating practices, that would have been extremely damaging to the confidence of those officers who were not engaged in, for instance, unauthorised relationships.
You have seen in this inquiry, but also as your time as a DI and also as a UCO, countless reports about the minutiae of people's relationships in various groups, going into excruciating detail about who was breaking up with who was sleeping with who, where people were living, lot of personal information. And so, again, if that was done as on an industrial scale, shouldn't at least some of those detective skills have been deployed in relation to the officers under you as a basic step in supervising them?
No, not unless there was a reason at the time to do that. And the situation now is, with the benefit of hindsight, we're aware of that, but I think one needs to have a starting point to initiate something as intrusive as monitoring of telephones, etc.
It's not just with hindsight, though, is it? Because we looked at earlier the Tradecraft Manual itself that talked about divorces, disciplinary action taken against people in sexual relationships, the interviews address sexual relationships. So this is not something that is now brought to your attention. It was always an issue, wasn't it?
No, I don't believe it was.
It was a hands-off approach to management.
No.
Why couldn't the managers have conversations with officers in relation to their personal lives, probing them as to, well, how's it going at home, what they're up to, and sort of getting to know their officers, given your description of this as being a family and given that you were a DI for nearly 7 years? Why wasn't there that sort of more intrusive questioning about how they were getting on, the nature of their own home lives?
Those sort of conversations happened all the time, either between the field officers and the management at all levels. So that was that kind of that kind of dialogue was present whenever there were meetings between field and office.
Going back to Mark Jenner, I wonder if we could just call up on screen, please, MPS 0009531. So this is at your tab B162. The document that we are about to go through is dated the 9th of April 2001. I just want to orientate this in time with what was going on in the SDS office a few months earlier, and we will come to it in due course, but Rosa called the SDS office on the 12th of December 2000. So this is a file note that we have dated the 9th of April 2001. So 4 months after Rosa calls the SDS officer, file note, touchy subject, Bob Lambert contacted the office on Friday the 28th of May to say that Terry had contacted him to say that he had a phone call from a female calling herself Alison, who was inquiring where TS, touchy subject, HN15, could be. She made reference to TS's white van and that he had bought it off Terry. She also spoke to touchy subject coming from Birkenhead and referred to his father's illness. Does this note jog your memory of the issue of Alison calling the office? Ring any bells? Do you remember that happening?
Some very vague bells, yes.
Given that Rosa had called the office a few months earlier, were you not concerned about a female activist calling to try and locate Mark Jenner?
Well, if anything, I would be equally concerned with a male activist calling in the same circumstances.
No difference?
In terms of no, potentially no difference.
There is a difference, though, isn't there?
Well, we know that with hindsight, I think, yes.
If we take that document down, could we please move to MPS 0749473, which is tab B39, sir? This is one of your file notes. It is dated the 16th of July 2001. I wonder if you can turn to page 3, please, in this. So this is one of the file notes that we can see HN53 at the bottom. So this is a document that you yourself would have typed up. Is that right?
Yes, it looks to me that. Yes.
So it begins on the 25th of June 2001. Terry, touchy subject's former employer, received a phone call from Privacy, who asked if the former knew how to get hold of touchy subject. He gave no explanation as to why he wanted to get in touch, although the conversation seemed fairly relaxed. Terry made it clear that TS no longer worked for him and that he hadn't heard from him for some while. Now, if we just go down towards the bottom of the page, can you see the penultimate paragraph beginning TS is relatively relaxed? So TS, Mark Jenner, relatively relaxed about the inquiry and thinks that it might emanate from Alison, and then says this, who occupied a room in his former duff. Now, would that not have piqued your interest to know that the female activist trying to contact Mark Jenner had occupied a room in his former duff?
Well, I mean, looking at this, I would. This suggests that she occupied a room in a block. I don't know. I don't know the circumstances of the duff where he was living. That it was another room.
Now, it goes on to say she is the girlfriend of Mark Metcalf, co-weary of touchy subjects, and. Just pausing there, just to be fair to you, HM53, when Mark Jenner gave his evidence to the inquiry, he accepted that he referred to Alison as Mark Metcalf's girlfriend to essentially to try and put you off the scent. But it describes, as set out here, a conversation that you had with Mark Jenner about Alison trying to contact him, yes?
I'm sorry, I don't understand that.
So we can see here there's a description of Alison trying to contact Mark Jenner, and the words that you say is she is the girlfriend of Mark Metcalf, and Mark Jenner said in evidence, well, that's what he told you to essentially to put you off the scent because he was in a relationship with her. But my question is this: in your conversation with Mark Jenner, were you not suspicious? Did you not press him in relation to what his true relationship was with Alison?
I don't recall that conversation, no.
Just to finish it, so she is the girlfriend of Mark Metcalf, and her mother, who is described as very well off, was closely involved with the Colin Roach Centre. Alison thinks TS might be sufficiently concerned about his welfare and sufficiently funded to generate some kind of inquiry into his whereabouts and well-being. So is your evidence that Alison trying to contact Mark Jenner did not, in your mind, raise any suspicions that anything untoward had happened?
Well, on the face of what I'm reading there, the note that I wrote, that would be the case, yes. But I don't now have a memory of what that conversation was about or that engagement was about.
Again, given the timing of it, though, because it is 6-7 months after Rosa phoned the office trying to find Jim Boiling, and so this is not an isolated incident, is it? It is a theme of female activists trying to contact male UCOs, isn't it?
Well, on the face of it, that sounds like I can't remember the circumstances or where I was when that first phone call happened.
Could we take that document down and bring up MPS 309432? So this is a document that was produced by one of the DSs, Steve Tiddy. It's dated the 10th of October 2000. And I just want to ask you about, again, is this a document that you have seen recently? Have you had a chance to look at this recently?
Is this?
It's the Operational Legends document. Perhaps if we look at some of the detail, but please, if you need time to consider it, please say. Could we turn to the last paragraph on the first page, which spills over onto the next page, paragraph 5. So here, Steve Tiddy states, partnerships in the left-wing field are by and large confined to the parties that they are members of. For example, there are a large number of cohabiting partners relationships within the SWP and SP, and anyone who enjoys single status over a certain period may invite unwanted suspicion. So we can the message here from Steve Tiddy is that in the left-wing field, large number of people cohabit, have relationships with those that are in the same group, and anyone who is single in that group would invite unwanted suspicion. Okay.
Yeah.
And then he states this in the note: the most difficult of this type of inquiry is generally instigated from an attached female who may be taking soundings on behalf of one of her friends. The female antennae is a difficult creature to subdue, and whereas as a rule they employed monogamy, they do possess the ability to unearth doubts about perceived relationships. And then this: there have been recent operations, e.g. touchy subject, so Mark Jenner, and Psycho Dream, Jim Boiling, where due to the lifestyle employed by the operatives, their bona fides were considered unimpeachable. This is patently not the case in every operation, and consideration should now be given to providing additional operational support to field officers. So in terms of that paragraph, just going through that now, does that ring any bells in terms of a document that you remember reading at the time, or more recently when it was provided to you by the inquiry?
Well, the latter, I don't recall it originally.
It's one of those.
But I may have been aware of it at the time, but I have no recollection of that.
We can see at the end of the document you're noted as being copied into it. Does that not make it clear that what Steve Tiddy is referring to is that Mark Jenner and Jim Boilings, that their bona fides was considered unimpeachable because they were in relationships with the people they were spying on? That's why they were considered unimpeachable.
Well, no, when I read that, I read it that touchy subject and Psycho Dream had established what their relationship circumstances, lifestyle circumstances were, and that those bona fides were considered unimpeachable. I didn't read that necessarily that it was because they were in a relationship themselves.
But the top part of this paragraph is not talking about relationships in the sense of friendships. It talks about, second line, that large number of cohabiting partners relationships within the SWP and SP, and then countering that with being single. So do you see in the second sentence as talking about relationships in the context of sexual relationships, partners, and then the opposite of that being someone of single status? So it's about sexual relationships, isn't it?
Well, it's about perception of what the relationship is with individuals. The way I read it from Steve Tilley was that's what he was talking about, and that touchy subjects and psychodrilling had a rock solid explanation as to what their relationships were that was considered unimpeachable. I didn't read it that he was saying that these two were in a relationship like the beginning of the paragraph.
Well, when Steve Tilley was asked about this note and the knowledge of the other managers and your other managers' knowledge of these relationships, he said that, well, as a result of this report, he would have said yes, that you and other managers would have been aware of the relationships.
Well, that's Steve Tilley's opinion. My recollection is that I was not aware, for instance, of touchy subject or psychodream having being in relationships.
Again, did that not pique your interest to ask Steve Tilley about this particular note? Because it's an unusual note, isn't it? This office note. It's not a common sort of document that certainly Steve Tilley produced, and then suddenly he provides this operational legends note that touches on, in paragraph 5, relationships. Did you not have a discussion about this note?
And I read it and would have said to him, but I thought it was a very, very useful note, and in particular, what piqued my interest and what would be helpful to develop was the final sentence, i.e., I'm sorry, it's just gone off the screen, in terms of the office taking steps to provide that kind of...
You're quite right. It is off screen. I wonder if you could just go to, I think, paragraph 6. So it is, in fact, the second sentence. This is merely the first step in provoking a discussion into the feasibility of introducing girlfriend, boyfriend into the equation on an occasional basis.
Yes.
So again, going to press you in relation to the reference to girlfriend, boyfriend there, because your evidence was your reading of this note, particularly in paragraph 5. But this is just about is relationship, non-sexual relationship with others in the group, well established in the group. But it's clear, isn't it, that this note is focused on sexual relationships, hence girlfriend and boyfriend being referred to.
Well, I think it's looking at the provision of a deception about the relationship that the individual UCO is in, to try and obviate the situation that Steve Tilley describes in the beginning of paragraph 5. So I think as I said to him, I thought it was a very, very useful note that really dwells on providing an answer to the problem identified in paragraph 5.
And the problem in paragraph 5 is suspicions of single undercover officers being single in their activist group and attracting suspicion, that problem?
Yes, without the proposal that's at the end of paragraph 6, the individual at UCO within those organisations would attract some unwanted suspicion, as Steve Tilley rightly says. The provision of the girlfriend-boyfriend into the equation would hopefully obviate that perception.
Another officer, I wonder if you can take that down, please. Another officer that also engaged in a sexual relationship in her undercover identity was HN26 and an ALF activist at the time, Thomas Frampton. So another relationship that your evidence is that you were unaware of.
Yes, I was unaware of that.
She not only left the SDS, but she also left the police force at the end of her deployment.
I believe that's true, yes.
Did you ever get to the bottom of why she not only left the SDS, but left the police force?
No, I didn't.
Again, from your description at the beginning of your evidence of these new recruits having a high degree of ability and integrity, and then as they spend time in the SDS, problems arise, don't they, with these deployments under your command?
Well, that would be the reading of the circumstances.
One of the reasons is because they were engaging in sexual relationships.
Yes.
Jim Boiling, as you are at least now aware, had engaged in 3 relationships in his undercover identity during his deployment. So we are calling them Monica, the relationship, just to orientate you in time. So the relationship with Monica was April to October 1997, so before you joined as DI. But he also had a relationship with Ruth from November 97 to July 1999, so moving into your tenure. And then the relationship with Rosa beginning 23rd of November 1999, and the relationship continuing there. So again, what is your explanation for another undercover officer having multiple relationships that you were unaware of, as you claim, during your tenure? How do you explain that in all of those years of his deployment that this never came to your attention?
Well, I think it's the only way I can answer that is that it's the degree of deception practiced by the individual to conceal his relationship from the office staff.
In relation to what you have just said about concealing relationships from the office staff, I wonder if we can bring up on screen. It is a transcript, or part of a transcript, of DS John Webb's evidence to this inquiry on the 18th of June this year. It's UCPI 40147, and it's on page 204 in that document. Now, HN53, DS John Webb left the SDS in 1997, so this was before you began there as a DI, but I just want to ask you about something that he said in evidence. In relation to these transcripts, sometimes it takes a little longer for us to bring them up on screen. So if we can go to page 204, please. Can you see in the left-hand column we have the counter time? I wonder if we have a look at from 1736 and 51 seconds down to 1737 and 27 seconds.
Yeah.
So this is a part of his evidence when he said that it was known by management in 1998 that Jim Boyling had had a sexual relationship as a UCO. And so you can see the question, well, can you help place the date of the conversation? And he says, it must have been in 1998. 1998, yes. Do you remember beginning, middle, end? No. And then he says, HN1 was in the back of my car. We were driving along and he said, have you heard whatever? And just told me. And this is a reference to telling him about Jim Boyling having a relationship. When you were referring to the SDS hierarchy, knowing you were referring to what? The detective inspector and the detective chief inspector in the SDS. And then he says it was an assumption because who it was who was telling me had also long departed the SDS. And so John Webb was saying that he believed that it was known about HN14 because after he left the SDS, he's meeting up with HN1 and HN1 tells him, have you heard about it? And he tells him. So it was something that was discussed in what you've described as the family, the small world of Special Branch.
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Was there not discussion
Okay.
about relationships during your time as a DI? Wasn't HN14 Jim Boyling's relationship referred to in office meetings or in discussions in all the time?
No, categorically not. Not with me.
Could we take that document down and bring up MPS 0748 100? So this is at your tab 35. This is a selection, HN53, of documents that were recovered from what's described as Jim Boyling's covert file. So it's sort of a personnel file that was recovered from the SDS office. Do you remember these sort of files that the officers had that sometimes contained documents such as their legend with their photograph and particular incidents that may have arisen during their deployment? Do you remember the officers, the UCOs, having these sorts of files, this one being called a covert file?
Not specifically, but it's possible because soon after I arrived, we went into the computer age. But there would have been, it would make sense that there was a sort of folder for individuals, officers, where there were documents of relevance within the unit.
Could we turn to page 2? So this is a note from Rosa. Does that document look familiar to you?
No, I've never seen that before.
Begins Rosa, the phone number's given. Privacy from upstairs will remember me and the neighbours at number 39. Need to contact his family to know if they've heard anything. And if you turn over the page, please, we can see there's a file note and at the bottom BG. So this is Bernie Greeny's file note. Okay. And so he's referring to that note that we just had on screen on page 2. And the antepenultimate paragraph says, before leaving the flat, Rosa wrote out a short note attached, which she had asked the decorator to pass on to the landlord. Basically, the note is asking him to contact her with any information he may receive about PD, so Psychodream Jim Boyling, in the future. He's not anticipating hearing from her again, but if she does ascertain his phone number, then he will deal with her accordingly. Nothing further has been heard from Rosa since this visit. PD is aware of this development, but is not unduly concerned. He is confident that he has left no trail for her or anyone else to pursue. HN53 will further discuss the matter with PD when they meet on Thursday the 9th of November. Now, if we zoom out of that. We can see at the bottom you're on the original, the copy to list, HN58, HN53. So you would have been shown this document at the time, yes?
Yes.
And further to that, there's a reference to you. We'll further discuss the matter with Jim Boyling when they meet on the 9th of November. Again, do you recall that meeting actually taking place? So Rosa trying to get hold of Jim Boyling, not unduly concerned about it, but you are the one marked here as to meet him to discuss it. Does that ring any bells?
Without sight of a note of that, it doesn't ring any bells. And had there been a meeting, I would have completed a note of the meeting.
Could we please turn to page 10 in this document? So page 10, this is your DCI HN58's file note. So this is the 18th of December 2000. And we can see it begins on Monday the 17th of December at 10:20 a.m. I received a phone call from JB Jim Boyling, who asked that I ring him back in about 30 minutes. I spoke to him again at 10:50 a.m. He said that about a week ago he had emailed Rosa to see how things were going. He had received a long reply within the last 2 days from Rosa, who went through a long list of checks that she had done to disprove his identity. She had been to St. Catherine's House and had reported Jim Boyling missing in Turkey. She had checked on visas, had even made inquiries at the British consulate in Istanbul. She said that her close friend Helen Steele had recounted a similar experience to her, no doubt the JD reference to John Dines scenario. Now, just pausing there, by this date, December 17th, 18th, things were moving on as far as Rosa was concerned, because not only is she emailing, but she is going to, if we just look at that first paragraph, extraordinary lengths to try to find him, isn't she?
It seems so.
And the obvious reason that a female activist is going to great length to try to find a male UCO is because they've been in a relationship together.
Well, not necessarily.
We will come on to it in more detail in due course, but you accept now that Helen Steele and John Dines had a sexual relationship.
Yes.
And so could you help with the reference here to the JD scenario at the end of this sentence? She said that her close friend Helen Steele had recounted a similar experience to her. No doubt the John Dines scenario.
Well, the similar scenario is, I presume, a reference to Helen Steele's attempts to locate John Dines.
But again,
So the interpretation at the time of whether that is because this is a committed activist of whatever gender trying to locate a missing fellow activist or an individual in a relationship, the scenario referred to is the, for want of a better word, pursuit of John Dines by Helen Steele that was current at the time.
The way in which you just describe it as committed action by an activist of whatever gender, that gives the impression that it made no difference whatsoever to you when considering this at the time, that the person trying to contact Jim Boyling was female. Did that really not make any difference?
Well, I have very, very unclear memory of this whole incident as far as Rosa is concerned. So what judgments I was making at the time, I don't know. But as far as I recall, I had no reason to believe that this was a result of a relationship, as opposed to an activist trying to identify a possible UCO.
When you say you had no reason to believe that, I wonder if we can turn to page 13, please. Because on page 13, we have a reference to a resume of email from Rosa. Now, this document, a long time ago, we don't have any initials at the bottom of it. Is there something that you typed up? Can you help us with that?
That doesn't, my immediate reaction is that doesn't look like my style of writing at all.
So it summarizes email, but we can see that the description is just received Boyling's postcard from Malawi, complains that she hadn't heard from JB for 1.5 months. He was traveling into Syria, zone flaring into war. She had discovered that JB had not left Istanbul, had not applied for a Syrian visa. She had evidently contacted the British embassy in Istanbul. So again, we have the description of the steps that she is taking to find him, yes?
Mm.
And then if you look at the penultimate line, she started seeing someone, but seems to accept that life moves on. So in terms of your evidence that, well, don't have a clear recollection of this, but from the documents that you would have read, if not drafted yourself at the time, well, that's a clear reference to a relationship, isn't it? You started seeing someone, but accept that life moves on. It's a clear reference to a relationship.
Well, in the first instance, it's not a document that I've written. I do not recall seeing that document before I was shown it. So it's difficult to make a judgment on that.
If we turn to page 14, please. So this is, again, JB's assessment of Rosa emails and the visit to the Duff address. Again, just in terms of like the format of it, is that, can you help us with who may have drafted that?
Well, it's not mine. In terms of who could have drafted it, so is this before Mike Dell's time? No, it doesn't look like Mike Dell's. I don't know. It's certainly not mine.
In relation to what these documents are showing is that they relate to someone trying to locate and identify one of your undercover officers. So one of the most serious types of issues that you would have dealt with as a DI in the SDS, yes?
Yes.
So if there's any hint that an officer is to be compromised, this must have taken top priority.
Not necessarily at the time, because one of my other functions was dealing with Operation Muscat and the AMB litigation. I'm not sure what the dates were when I was away from the office, but the work involved in those offices would have impacted on my contribution to this this kind of incident. And what, if I may, I just like to say that there are considerable areas where I cannot remember the specifics of incidents which I know I should remember, and I'm not quite sure why that is. But incidents, this incident, for instance, I have some recollection of, but not the specifics.
Because we have the documents, I'm going to, if we look at, can you see the bullet points at the bottom? If you type up 1, 2, 3, and then it's just below the fourth bullet point up. Can you see where it says Rosa talks of finding a new boyfriend?
Oh, yes.
Now, your evidence was that you don't have a clear recollection of reading this, but would you agree that anyone who read that, it must have been crystal clear that Rosa had been in a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship with Jim Boyling?
Well, I don't necessarily read it in that way.
I'm going to ask if we could please turn to page 15. So we have an email to Jim Boyling at his Jim X Van Hotmail address. The date of it, 13th of December 2000. So this is Rosa emailing Jim Boyling to say this: Dear Jim, I just received your postcard from Malawi. Don't know if this will ever reach you. I guess you don't know that the Turkish authorities had commenced an official search for you on request of the British consulate, as you had appeared not to have left Istanbul or applied for Syrian visa. It was 1.5 months. I heard nothing, as you were supposedly walking into a zone flaring into war. You hurt the person who loved you, making sure they had no contact with anyone who may have been able to tell them if they were okay. I knew your funeral could have passed, and I'd never know. I'm sorry to be sending this message across the continents, but the circumstances have been such. I've been crawling my way out of a black hole. Now, clearly, she had been in a relationship with Jim Boyling, having read that.
Oh, yes, I agree, yes.
Yeah. If you had not, in what circumstances would this email not have been brought to your attention?
Well, in the first instance, because I was not at the office, I was away out of the country working. And equally, maybe that it was dealt with by the DCI and the DS. But that's all I can say in terms of explanation.
Just on this particular page and this email, I wonder if we can just zoom out. I'd like to ask you about something that is 6 lines up from the end of this page. It's a sentence that begins, "The old activist scene." You can see there, it's about halfway down this, thank you. So the old activist scene. So this is Rosa in her, at the end, towards the end of the email. At the old activist scene, we were both disillusioned with that before you left. Surprised you thought I'd still be there. So again, in terms of interpretation of that, a reference to Rosa having been disillusioned and left the old activist scene there, yes?
Yes.
Okay. I wonder if we can turn over to page 16, please. And it's the top line of page 16. So in this email, after much persuasion from my sister, I've started seeing someone 2 weeks ago. It's early days. I'm heavily scarred, but life moves on. Whoever read this, again, would have been in no doubt that there had been a deep relationship between Jim Boyling and Rosa.
Yes, that would be the reading of it, yes.
And no thought at all was given to Rosa herself.
Presumably not. I don't know.
We have a series of emails, desperate attempts to try and find Jim Boyling, going to great lengths, and someone who's clearly suffering. But the thought of doing anything that would assist Rosa's welfare never entered anyone's mind in the SDS, did it?
I don't know.
Could we turn to page 17, please? So again, a resume of Jim's withdrawal, referring to Jim Boyling's withdrawal. Again, in terms of these bullet points here, is your evidence that you have no recollection of this point, of this period of Jim Boyling's deployment, his withdrawal?
Again, it's not my document. And no, I don't have a clear memory of it.
Are you accepting it's possible that you read these documents? Probable? What could you just help us with that?
Well, it is possible. But it's equally possible I could have read it at a later stage, but rather than at the time of writing. But it's possible, but nothing in there rings a bell with me.
It's about 7 bullet points up from the bottom. Can you see it says Rosa talks of finding a new boyfriend, possibly going to live in privacy, and then hooray.
Okay. Yes.
So again, someone expressing relief that, oh, she's found a new boyfriend, and hooray. Again, you don't recall any discussion about this aspect?
No, I don't.
Could we turn to page 19, please? I wonder if you could just turn over the page, please. Document headed Rosa contact with the office. Okay. Yes. The document is 0748100, and we're moving to page 19. Wonder if we can expand that. An activist contacting the SDS office must have been extremely dramatic when you first heard of this, yes?
I would imagine so, yes.
Can you recall of any other occasion when an activist called up the duty phone or the office phone?
Sorry. No.
Does this event not stand out in your memory, i.e. the time that an activist repeatedly called the SDS office phone?
Well, it should do, but it doesn't, I'm afraid.
Rosa contact with the office on Tuesday the 12th of December, so 12th of December 2000. 4 calls were received in the office from Rosa. The following is a synopsis of the calls. 11:42 a.m. duty phone. Rosa asked for Jim, NW, so Noel War, answered and said he didn't know him. 11:50 a.m. duty phone. Rosa asked for Matt, a friend of Jim's. Noel War denied all knowledge of Jim. And then this, Rosa in a distressed state described Jim as 5'9". She knew him as Jim Sutton. Noel Ward's evidence was that it was clear that this was a reference to a former relationship, a girlfriend. Do you accept that by this point, anyone who had had any dealings with this issue of Rosa trying to track down Jim Boiling, if there is any doubt beforehand that looking at this document and what it represented, that this is clearly someone who had been in a relationship with one of your UCOs, Jim Boiling?
Well, it sounds like it, yes.
11:55 a.m, office phone, Rosa asked for Jim. BG, so Bernie Greeny. So this is a change in the person who answers the phone because it's to the office phone. Bernie Greeny answered and denied knowledge of him and said it was a private number and he couldn't help. Then 12:25 p.m, another call to the duty phone. So this is Noel War again. Rosa says, if you see Jim, tell him I'm leaving him and it's all over. You must have been aware of these calls.
Well, I looking at them, yes, I should have been, but I don't recall them. I don't recall the situation where the duty phone and the office phone was phoned. But I do accept that I should have known about that, but I don't remember it.
Could we turn to page 20, please? This is a file note dated the 12th of December 2000. So this is the same day that those calls came through. So the first call was 11:42 in the morning, and the fourth call was 5 to 1 in the afternoon. And on the same day, you provide this file note, yes?
Yes.
Now, you indicated at this time you might have been abroad, but looking at that file note, does that help you with where you would have been on the 12th of December 2000?
No, I absolutely accept that I've written that.
So your file note, Rosa, close to area of Psycho Dream, has obtained the phone numbers of the duty phone in the SDS office. Yesterday, she rang the duty phone 3 times and the office once, although all the office phones were out of order for much of the morning, trying to trace Jim Sutton. Noel War took all 3 mobile calls, and it would seem sensible for him to retain the duty phone for the time being. Bernie Greeny took the single call into and told Rosa the office that it was a private number, and like Noel War, denied knowing Jim Sutton. Although the calls may now be at an end, it is possible that Rosa could obtain the office subscriber details and less probably the duty phone. If she does, she may either ring again or make a personal appearance. In either case, we should be consistent in our response to her inquiries. Happy to acknowledge that we're a counselling firm used to taking local business, but have developed an adequate client base, had a number of small building repairs, cannot give our client information. We do not know a Jim Sutton, either as an employee or builder. Duty phone is Noel War's personal mobile. All of the emphasis here is protecting the SDS office, isn't it?
Yes, it is, absolutely.
There is, again, no hint of any concern for the welfare of Rosa.
The situation, seeing that report now, a situation like that means that we have to assess where we are in terms of the physical threat that those calls made. And we can either go down the road of assuming the worst, or we can go down the road of hoping for the best. And hoping for the best would be negligent in many respects if we expose ourselves to risk. We have to treat that situation as being a potential threat to both Jim Sutton and the office operation in the first instance. That's why we would take that course of action.
You must have known during the time that you drafted this note that Rosa must have been in a relationship with Jim Boiling. You must have known that.
I do not recall that at all. I do not recall anyone telling me that or being aware of that.
There's a difference, isn't there? For someone specifically telling you, Jim Boyling has been in a relationship with Rosa. There's a difference between that and the evidence that we've just been going through, the emails that make it crystal clear that a relationship had been existing.
If I'd been armed with all of that information then beforehand, then you could make that judgment, I think. But without that, it's hindsight that's telling us that.
But the same day, so it must have been hours or even minutes after Rosa says, "Tell Jim I'm leaving him," that is recorded. You must have known about those calls. You must have known about all the lengths that she went through to try to find him.
Well, the answer is no, I don't.
So at what stage did you find out that Jim Boyling had been in a relationship with Rosa? Is your suggestion when it came out in the press or in the inquiry?
I learnt about that after I'd retired, and either through the press or the Operation Herne, but it was in the 2010s after I'd retired. I discovered that.
But why didn't you try to contact Jim Boyling and have it out with him in the sense of telling him to tell you, if you didn't already know, explain yourself, why is Rosa trying to contact you? It's clear that you've been in a relationship. We need to know what has been going on. There's no hint of contacting Jim Boyling. But why is that? Why not, if you didn't know, why not try to get to the bottom of it?
Well, I don't know if... I don't recall doing that, but I don't know whether that is because it was done by the DCI or the DSs. I don't know what action followed that situation. I'm sorry, I don't remember. That's what I meant to say. I don't remember what happened after that report, which I recognise as mine. I don't remember what happened after that.
In terms of the tenure of your evidence, is that, well, you weren't aware that any of this was going on in the SDS, but here we have the documents that make it clear that it was going on. But even presented with these documents, nothing's done about it in terms of reprimanding HN14, Jim Boyling, or even questioning him about it. So when you're presented with it, nothing's done.
Well, I have said that I wasn't aware that there had been a relationship, a physical relationship, between Jim Boyling and Rosa until many, many years later. At the time, my reading of the situation was that this was an activist who was trying to identify Jim Sutton and potentially damage the unit. So my concern was with the safety of officers and the unit.
Any concern about Jim Boyling?
Well, absolutely. Of course, that would be at the heart of it.
I wonder if we can take this document down and just bring up Jim Boyling's witness statement. It's UCPI 36294. I wonder if we could turn, please, in that document to page 197. In particular, paragraph 497. So this is Jim Boyling's statement to the inquiry, where he states this: neither I or my family were offered any advice or ongoing support by the SDS or the Metropolitan Police Service following my withdrawal. I specifically expected to be offered some sort of counselling shortly after I finished my deployment, but no offer was made. After my deployment had ceased, when I became aware that Rosa was on the verge of finding me, in November 2001, I phoned DS Greeny and informed him of the full circumstances and asked for advice. I remember this was at a weekend. He said he would come to speak to me at the E-Squad office at 10 a.m. Monday morning. Nobody came and there was no communication, although I was made aware through ex-colleagues that officers had taken action in relocating themselves as a result. A few days later, I was contacted by DI HN53, and he told me not to contact the office again. He did not give me any alternative way of contacting the office or SDS. I was dumbfounded. So instead of you contacting Jim Boyling, he calls DS Greeny. They arrange to meet. DS Greeny doesn't turn up. He then phones the SDS office, gets through to you, and your assistance to him was to tell him not to contact the office again, leaving him dumbfounded. How do you account for treating HN14 like that at this stage?
Well, that in the first instance, that doesn't sound like me in any respect whatsoever. I would never tell a former SDS officer not to contact the office again in the way that is being suggested in the statement. Where it says I did not give him any alternative way of contacting the office or SDS, I'm just looking at the preceding sentence, which talks about the officers had taken action in relocating themselves as a result. Whether that means that the office was relocated and there was no means of communication. But it is not my nature in any respect to say to a former SDS officer who had been, whether he's just left or not to contact the office again in a negative way. That's just not the way I operate.
HN53, just to be as fair to you as possible, when he was giving evidence, I just want to read to you what Jim Boyling said about this particular call, which adds a little bit more detail. So he just says this, he says, the phone call was very terse. It was, just don't contact us again. In fact, he said, referring to you, what you said, don't call the office. And I remember saying I didn't call the office, I called HN52. And he, referring to you, and he just said, don't contact us again. But then he said, it's not just you, we are telling all former officers not to contact us again. So again, he provides a bit more detail to that call. So you saying tersely, well, don't contact us again, but also saying, well, we're telling all former UCOs not to contact us again.
Well, I think, it sounds to me like he's taken the wrong end of the stick, and that this is a message we're trying to put out to former UCOs. Again, I don't recall doing this, but it is, as I said, it's not my nature to be rude or intemperate with people. But it's how the other person interprets the call.
Is the reason that you were to use Jim Boyling's word terse, is the reason that you were terse and didn't want to him to call back, was because he was the person that started all of this, that he was the person that misconducted himself by having a relationship with Rosa. So he brought all of this problem on to the SDS. He had a relationship with Rosa, and now Rosa has tracked down the SDS office, and so when he calls, he's the last person you want to speak to because it was his fault. Was that the thought process about HN14? The reason you were out of character terse with him is because it was his fault in your mind?
Well, no, because I didn't believe that he had been in a physical relationship with the individual. So I'm simply talking to him as a former UCO who has left, he's left the unit and communicating with him at the same time as others because of the potential risk to the office.
So, looking again at that paragraph that you have on the screen, nobody came and there was no communication, although I was made aware through ex-colleagues that officers had taken action in relocating themselves as a result. As a result of Rosa's calls to the SDS office, did the SDS office move locations?
Well, as I said earlier, I presume they must have done at that point. And I could see that there would be valid reasons for doing that.
The way in which you're describing it, though, is as if it was presented to you for the first time. Do you really have no recollection of the office moving as a result of someone finding the numbers out? Would that not have stood out as a really significant event in your entire tenure as DI, that you had to move offices because it had been compromised?
Well, it should do, but again, I'm not clear from what is said on the statement there, whether this is office or premises, or is this one of the flats? I just don't recall. I'm sorry.
Is there any reason that you can help us with as to why you can't recall these events, which I'm going to suggest are significant events? Why do you think you can't recall them?
Well, I really don't know. There were a number of major events in my time on the unit that I do have recollection of, and they form the focus of a lot of my work. But other events which should stand out don't.
Before we break for lunch, there's just one more document I'd like to ask you about. Could we please turn to MPS 304871? So this is a document behind your tab B144. Now, do you remember when we were going through some of the emails that one of the emails Rosa said were to the effect that she was disillusioned with the activist scene, surprised that you think she was still there? In terms of Rosa herself, would you, if you have no recollection, would you accept that you would have asked questions or caused to be asked questions? Who is this Rosa? Who is she? And be provided with as much information as possible about her?
Yes.
Jim Boyling has described Rosa at that time as follows. He says in his statement, and we needn't turn it up, but the reference is paragraph 263 in his statement. He says this: I would not describe Rosa as particularly active within RTS, Reclaim the Streets. I do not think she had any previous involvement in RTS prior to meeting me. After meeting me, she did attend meetings and events. I would not describe Rosa as an RTS activist. She attended meetings and some events and assisted in some organising committees, but at a reasonably low level. So the description of Rosa is not particularly active in Reclaim the Streets that Jim Boyling infiltrated, didn't have any previous involvement with them, and anything that she did have involvement in was at a low level. And so do you recall finding out from discussions that you must have had that Rosa was no threat at all to Jim Boyling?
Well, it's difficult to quantify a threat when you don't know what the potential threat is.
The document that we have on screen is an application for Rosa's billing, and the applicant officer is you. Can you see that at the top?
No, it's gone off the screen, sorry.
Oh.
I accept that.
I wonder if we can just check why that might be the case, because we have the document on our screen.
It's back, yes.
Thank you. So that sort of document, does that look familiar in terms of the structure applying for
Yes.
billing information? So we can see that you're the applying officer. Again, similar question. Do you remember making this application, or does this bring back any recollection of this particular period of time?
Well, it reminds me that I did put in that, clearly put in that application, yes.
All right. Well, if we turn over the page, please, we can see at the top, this request for billing information is the only means of securing a specific piece of intelligence, which is crucial to preventing the offences listed above. I'm sorry to do this. Can we just go back a page so we can see what the offences listed above are? We can see it's in the bottom box: criminal damage, threats to public order. Okay, so this request for billing information is the only means of securing a specific piece of intelligence, which is crucial to preventing the offences listed above. That was not correct, was it?
Well, yes, it was.
What hint was there that Rosa was going to commit criminal damage?
Well, it's the application was based on the fact that there was a possibility that she would pose a threat to the individual.
That's not criminal damage, is it?
Well, potentially it is criminal damage.
Harm to an individual? That's assault, isn't it?
Yes.
It doesn't say assault, it says criminal damage.
Yes.
So why does it say criminal damage in nature of the inquiry? Why is that?
Well, I can't explain that. I don't know.
Threats to public order. What threat to public order is Rosa at this point?
I think the point is answered in the investigation section, in the sense that she was believed to have made contact with a number of violence-prone activists around the country, and the information sought would enable us to frustrate plans for public disorder and prevent serious criminal damage. So that would be the rationale.
It's an application based on a lie, isn't it? There's no suggestion at the time that the concern that you and your colleagues had is that Rosa was going to commit criminal damage, provide a threat to public order.
We didn't know what the nature of the threat was.
But anyone looking at the emails that she sent to Jim Boyling would have known that this was just someone trying to find someone who disappeared. This is not an individual that is threatening any violence, not someone who's threatening to damage anything, and let alone someone who's suggesting, well, let's have a demonstration and see how many people we can bring to the streets of London. None of that at all. So it's an application based on a lie.
Well, I would disagree.
If we look at the investigation section of the form, the target, who is now the sole occupant of address, is an active supporter of a number of anarchist organisations. But again, what we've just established is that she's not a supporter of a number of anarchist organisations, is she?
Well, I would have composed that on the basis of presumably what Jim Sutton had said, but more importantly, what the assessment within Special Branch was about the individual.
But you said you didn't have any discussion with Jim Boyling, and when he tries to call you, you tell him, don't call the office again. So it couldn't have been from him.
Well, this is in the sense of the office talking to Jim Boyling. I don't know what, I can't remember specifically what conversations we had, but clearly that would reflect his views, as well as the assessment from the main branch.
She had recently joined a small cell within the RTS. Now, that word cell, it's commonly used in relation to extremist groups. A classic example of a cell is almost like in a terrorist organisation. There's a terrorist cell. It has a specific meaning, doesn't it? When you use the word someone's in a cell, it is what you're setting out here is an exaggeration to obtain her billing data, isn't it? That's the reason that you refer to her joining a small cell.
Well, I don't agree with that. No, I think it's reflecting how she was perceived at the time and what the nature of the threat was perceived to be.
In the emails, disillusioned, left the scene. Jim Boyling's description of her wasn't even in RTS until he came along, and even then she was in it at a low level. It is the opposite of the truth, isn't it? What you've set out in this application form.
No, I don't think it is.
She has recently joined a small cell within the RTS and is believed to have made contact with a number of violence-prone activists around the country. Where did that come from?
Well, there must be a basis for that, but without access to what that basis was, I can't answer that.
Who are the candidates for providing you with that information?
Well, it would be the C Squad.
The information sought will enable police to frustrate plans for public disorder and prevent serious criminal damage. How does obtaining Rose's billing data enable the police to frustrate plans for public order and prevent serious criminal damage?
Well, it would enable us to get to the bottom of what the threat was. That was the intention.
So I don't know if now is a convenient time to break.
Certainly, we'll resume at 2:10.